was pinned against the cold marble wall of the most expensive penthouse in Seoul. A hand, covered in black ink tattoos of tigers and thorns, was pressed right next to my head. I could smell his scent, expensive sandalwood and the metallic tang of a weapon. Jang Min-Joon, the man they called the Silent Reaper, was inches from my face. Everyone in this city knew the rumor. He was a machine made of muscle and ice. He had never touched a woman. He had never loved. But as his dark eyes locked onto mine, I saw a flame that wasn't supposed to be there. "You chose the wrong house to clean, Kendra Hale," he growled, his voice vibrating in my chest. "Because now that I've seen you, I'm never letting you leave." I looked down at the shattered glass by my feet and the blood on his knuckles. I didn't just take a job as a maid. I just became the obsession of a man who doesn't know how to stop. The heavy iron gates of the Jang estate groaned shut behind me, sounding like a prison door. I stood there, clutching my small bag, looking up at the massive stone house. I had a degree in accounting from Seoul National University, one of the best schools in the country. But in this city, that degree was just a piece of paper. Nobody wanted to hire a foreigner who spoke her mind. They said I had too much attitude. I was tired of being broke, so I took the only job I could find. The head housekeeper met me at the door. She looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "There are 3 rules here, Kendra," she whispered, her voice sharp. "First, never look him in the eye. Second, never speak to him unless he speaks to you first. And third, never ever enter the West Wing. If you value your life, you will stay away from that hallway." I nodded, my heart thumping against my ribs. I knew who lived here. Everyone in Seoul knew the name Jang Min-Joon. They called him the Ice King. He was 45 years old and the most powerful man in the underworld. People whispered that his body was covered in dark dragon tattoos and that he had a heart made of stone. But the strangest story of all was that he had never touched a woman. In 45 years, he had never known love, a kiss, or even a girlfriend. He was a ghost who lived in a palace of shadows. As I started my work, the silence of the house felt heavy. I scrubbed the marble floors until my back ached. The other servants moved like robots, too afraid to even breathe loudly. I felt like a bird trapped in a golden cage, surrounded by expensive art and cold stone. Then I heard it, a slow, heavy footstep coming from the top of the grand stairs. I remembered the rule, don't look. I quickly bent my head, staring at the bucket of soapy water. My hands started to shake. The air in the hallway suddenly turned freezing. I could feel a powerful presence standing right behind me. A scent of expensive wood and cold rain filled the air. He was right there. The man who had stayed pure for nearly half a century was watching me. I wanted to run, but my feet felt stuck to the floor. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was a guest in a kingdom of secrets, and the king was finally home. The silent halls of the mansion felt like they were watching me. Every floor I polished and every vase I dusted reminded me that I was a guest in a dangerous world. I spent most of my morning in the library, a massive room filled with thousands of old books that smelled like history and secrets. The sunlight hit the dust dancing in the air, making the room feel almost peaceful. But that peace did not last long. The heavy oak doors swung open with a bang. I did not have time to look down or hide. Jang Min-Joon walked in, and the air in the room seemed to vanish. He was not wearing a shirt. His broad back was a map of dark ink and jagged white scars. A massive dragon tattoo curled around his shoulder, its tail disappearing into the waistband of his black trousers. He looked like a warrior who had survived 100 wars. I froze, my cloth still pressed against a mahogany shelf. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me. Slowly, he turned around. His chest was muscular and covered in more ink, but it was his face that stopped my heart. His jaw was sharp, and his eyes were as dark as the midnight sea. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my chest. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was not just loud, it was deep and vibrating, like rolling thunder before a storm. Most people would have looked at the floor or started crying. My heart was racing, but I refused to show him my fear. I stood up straight and looked him right in the eye, breaking the first rule of the house. "The new maid, sir," I said. My voice was clear and steady. "Kendra Hale." He did not yell. He did not tell me to leave. Instead, he took a step toward me, then another. He moved like a predator, slow and graceful. He invaded my personal space until I could feel the heat radiating off his skin. Up close, he did not look like the angry monster the rumors described. He looked confused. He stared at my face, my hair, and my eyes as if he were seeing a color for the first time in 45 years. It was as if he were a man waking up from a long, cold sleep, and he did not know how to handle the light. "A maid," he whispered, his eyes searching mine. "You should not be here." He was so close I could see the pulse jumping in his neck. I knew I should run, but I could not move. The Ice King was finally looking at me, and for the first time, the ice was starting to crack. Weeks passed, but the air in the mansion never became easy. Every time I turned a corner or entered a room, I felt a heavy weight against my skin. It was him. Jang Min-Joon did not speak to me after that day in the library, but he never truly left me alone. I felt his dark eyes on me everywhere I went. While I scrubbed the cold marble floors, I could feel him watching from the shadows of the hallway. While I ate my simple meals in the quiet kitchen, I would look up and see his silhouette passing by the glass doors. It was not like he was hunting me. It was like he was studying me. I often thought to myself, why is he looking at me like I am a puzzle he cannot solve? I was just a girl from America, but to him, I seemed like a mystery from another planet. One late afternoon, I was in the garden pulling weeds near the fountain. I looked up and saw him standing on the high balcony of the West Wing. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hands gripping the stone railing. He was not looking at the city or his guards. He was looking straight down at me. In that moment, the scary stories from the newspapers felt wrong. He did not look like a monster who enjoyed hurting people. He looked like a king trapped in a golden cage. He had all the money and power in the world, but he had no one to talk to. He had spent 45 years building a wall of ice around his heart to stay strong. Now, he wanted to reach out, but he had no idea how to be human. I did not look away this time. I let him watch me. I saw the way his jaw tightened when I smiled at a small bird near the water. He stayed there for a long time, as still as a statue. He was a man who had never known the warmth of another person, and for some reason, he could not stop seeking that warmth in me. I was supposed to be afraid of the Ice King, but as our eyes met across the distance, all I felt was a strange, deep sadness for the most powerful man in Seoul. The sky over Seoul broke open that night. A massive thunderstorm shook the heavy stone walls of the mansion, and the sound of thunder felt like drums of war. I could not sleep. The air in my small room was too thick, so I stepped out into the dark hallway to get a glass of water from the kitchen. The house was usually silent, but tonight, the shadows felt different. As I rounded the corner into the moonlit kitchen, I slammed right into a hard, warm wall of muscle. I gasped, stumbling back, but a strong hand caught my arm to steady me. It was him. Jang Min-Joon was leaning against the cold marble counter, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts. In the dim light, I saw something dark dripping from his shoulder and staining his white silk shirt. It was blood. "You're hurt," I whispered, my heart jumping into my throat. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were wild, like a cornered animal. I realized then that the rumors were true. The enemies were always watching. An assassin had tried to take the king's life while the rest of the world slept. He tried to push past me, his face pale with pain. "Sit down," I ordered. My voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the rain against the windows. He froze. He looked at me with a mix of shock and fury. "You do not command me," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. Even while bleeding, he tried to hold onto his power. "I am an accountant," I said, stepping closer and meeting his gaze. "I know how to fix things and I know how to follow a plan. You are losing blood. Sit." To my surprise, his legs seemed to give way, and he sank into a wooden chair. I moved quickly, grabbing a first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. As I began to cut away the silk of his shirt, my fingers brushed against his hot skin. He gasped, a sharp sound that echoed in the quiet room. It was not just the pain, it was the touch. The moment our skin met, it felt like a bolt of lightning had traveled from the sky and into my fingertips. An electric shock ran through both of us. His hand gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood creaked. I looked up and saw his eyes were no longer cold. His dominance was slipping away, replaced by a raw, hungry desperation. He looked at me like I was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. For 45 years, no one had dared to touch him. and now he was shaking under my hands. The days after the storm felt different. The air in the mansion was heavy with a heat that had nothing to do with the weather. Every time I saw Jang Min-Joon in the hallway, my heart did a nervous dance against my ribs. I realized something that terrified me. I wasn't just afraid of him anymore. I wanted him. Every time he growled a command or looked at me with those dark, intense eyes, my breath caught in my throat. But I kept my face like stone. I reminded myself every morning that I was just the maid and he was the boss. There was a world of ice and blood between us that I could never cross. One afternoon, the head housekeeper sent me to clean his private office while he was away at a meeting. The room smelled like him, expensive tobacco and cold rain. As I dusted the heavy mahogany desk, my hand knocked over a small, leather-bound notebook. It fell open on the floor and I froze. I expected to see rows of numbers or names of enemies. Instead, I saw my own face. There were dozens of sketches, all drawn with careful, shaky lines. There was a drawing of me laughing in the garden, a sketch of me focused on my cleaning, and even a drawing of me sleeping in the library. He hadn't just been watching me, he had been memorizing me. For a man who had never loved a woman in 45 years, he was capturing every detail of my life like it was the most precious thing he owned. Suddenly, the door slammed open. Min-Joon stood there, his face turning a deep red from both anger and shame. He lunged forward and grabbed the notebook, slamming it shut so hard it sounded like a gunshot. "Get out!" he roared. His voice shook the walls, and his eyes were wide with a wild kind of fear. I backed away toward the door, my heart hammering in my ears. But as I looked at him one last time, I saw the truth. His mouth was telling me to leave, but his eyes were screaming for me to stay. He looked like a man who had just been caught in a lie he didn't want to tell. He was terrified of the power I had over him, and for the first time, I realized the Ice King was melting from the inside out. The air in the mansion felt like a bomb about to go off. Outside the heavy gates, the city was silent, but we all knew the truth. The rival gangs were moving in and they wanted blood. Jang Min-Joon had ordered a complete lockdown. Every window was covered, and men with guns stood at every door. The Ice King was not sitting on his throne today. He was in his office, packing back and forth like a caged tiger. I stood by the door, watching him. He had not slept in days. His hair was messy, and his shirt was unbuttoned at the top, showing the dark ink of the dragon on his chest. He stopped suddenly and looked at me. His eyes were red and full of a strange kind of pain. "Kendra, listen to me," he said, his voice low and rough. He walked over to the large painting on the wall and pushed it aside to show a hidden safe. "If the gates fall, if something happens to me, you take the money inside and you run. There is a car waiting in the back. Do not look back, just go." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a giant hand. I did not care about the money or the car. I only cared about the man standing in front of me. "I am not leaving you," I said. My voice did not shake. I stepped closer to him, ignoring every rule I had been told on my first day. Min-Joon let out a sound that was half growl and half sob. He reached out and grabbed my waist, pulling me hard against his chest. I could feel the heat of his body through my maid's uniform. His heart was beating so fast it felt like a drum. "Why?" he whispered into my hair. "Why are you doing this to me, Kendra? I have been pure for 45 years. I have been the strongest man in Seoul because I let no one in. I lived in the cold and I liked it." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, and his face was full of raw desperation. "And then you came here. You make me feel things I do not want to feel. You make me feel weak. You make me want to live for something other than war." He was shaking. The most feared man in the country was trembling in my arms because of a feeling he could not control. He was terrified of how much he needed me, and in that moment, the lockdown outside did not matter. The only thing that mattered was the fire burning between us in the dark. The office was quiet, but the air between us felt like it was about to catch fire. I could feel his heart beating through his shirt, a fast and heavy rhythm that told me he was losing the fight against himself. I reached up, my dark fingers resting against his pale, tattooed neck. I didn't look away from his intense gaze. "Love isn't weakness, Min-Joon," I whispered. My voice was soft, but in that silent room, it sounded like a shout. "It's the only thing that actually makes us strong." That was the final blow. The wall of ice he had built for 45 years didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The dam finally broke. Min-Joon let out a low, hungry sound and crashed his lips against mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It wasn't like the movies. It was a war. It was decades of being alone, decades of staying pure, and decades of hidden desire all exploding at once. His hands were everywhere, tangling in my hair and pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. He kissed me like he was a starving man, and I was the only thing that could save him. We didn't even try to make it to the bedroom. Right there, in the middle of his office, he pushed me back against the cold mahogany desk. The papers and pens slid to the floor, but neither of us cared. He showed me exactly how much he had been holding back. The Ice King was gone, and in his place was a wildfire that threatened to burn the whole house down. He was obsessed with every part of me. He couldn't get enough of the way I sounded when I breathed his name, or the way my skin felt against his tattoos. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about his enemies, his money, or his power. He had discovered something new to believe in, a new religion that started and ended with us. As the storm continued to howl outside the mansion, I realized that I had finally reached the heart of the most dangerous man in Seoul, and it was warmer than I ever imagined. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the office windows, turning the room a soft gold. For a moment, everything was peaceful. I was still wrapped in the warmth of the man who had finally let his guard down, but that peace was shattered by a sound that made the floor shake. A loud boom echoed through the estate as the heavy front gates were blown wide open. Shouts filled the air. I heard the stomping of heavy boots on the marble floors. I scrambled to fix my clothes as the doors to the office were kicked off their hinges. A group of armed men rushed in, but one person stood at the front. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was someone I knew from my university days, a former classmate I used to study accounting with. He wasn't holding a book now, he was holding a badge and a gun. He had become a police informant, and he had used my trail to find the king's hidden lair. "Kendra, get away from him," he yelled, his face red with anger and fear. "He is a monster, Kendra. He's a killer. We are here to save you from him." I stood frozen as the red dots of laser sights danced across the walls. I looked at the man I had just shared everything with. Min-Joon didn't look scared. He didn't even look surprised. He moved with the grace of a shadow, stepping directly in front of me to block their view. He stood tall, his dark eyes filled with a terrifying, cold fire. He drew his own gun and pointed it straight at my old friend. "You are mistaken," Min-Joon said. His voice was not a roar. It was a deadly whisper that filled the entire room. "You did not come here to save a maid. You came here to threaten my heart." He shifted his weight, his broad shoulders shielding me completely. "She is my wife," he declared, his voice echoing with a power I had never heard before. "Touch her, and I will burn this entire city to the ground to find you. This is not a warning. This is a promise." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. My former friend looked at me, then at the man who was ready to die to protect me. In that moment, I realized that I wasn't just a girl who needed a job anymore. I was the anchor for a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The war was coming, but I knew exactly which side I was on. The world felt different now. 3 months had passed since that explosive night in Seoul, and the cold gray concrete of the city was a distant memory. Instead of the smell of rain and old books, the air was filled with the sweet scent of salt and tropical flowers. We were far away from the wars, the gangs, and the police. Here, the turquoise waters of the Caribbean sparkled under the bright sun like a million tiny diamonds. Jang Min-Joon stood beside me on the shore. He wasn't wearing his expensive black suits or his heavy leather shoes. He was barefoot on the soft white sand, wearing a simple linen shirt that caught the warm breeze. The dragon tattoos on his neck and arms were still there, but they didn't look like symbols of war anymore. In the bright daylight, they just looked like part of the man I had grown to love. He stopped walking and turned to face me. The Ice King, who used to scare everyone in South Korea, was gone. His dark eyes were soft and full of a peace I had never seen before. Slowly, he sank down onto one knee in the sand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. When he opened it, a diamond the size of a bird's egg caught the sunlight, nearly blinding me with its beauty. "I spent 45 years being a boss," he said. His voice was no longer a roar or a growl. It was a gentle whisper that made my heart melt. "I spent my whole life building an empire of shadows because I thought I had to be alone to be strong. But I was wrong. I was just a man waiting for you to wake me up." He took my hand in his grip firm but careful. "I don't want to be the king of Seoul anymore, Kendra. I just want to be yours. Will you stay with me forever?" I looked down at him and smiled. I thought about the accounting degree that nobody wanted and the silent mansion where we first met. I thought about the man who had stayed pure for a lifetime just to give all his devotion to me. "I will," I said, pulling him up so I could look into his eyes. "But only if you promise to keep listening to your accountant. Someone has to make sure you don't spend all your money on giant diamonds." He laughed, a real, loud sound of pure joy, and pulled me into his arms. As he kissed me under the tropical sun, I knew that our story wasn't just about a boss and a maid anymore. It was about two people who found a home in each other, and for the first time in his life, Jang Min-Joon was finally free. Kindly subscribe to Mafia Boss Love Stories for more interesting stories.